film about the last Russian Tsar's affair with a ballerina is being released in cinemas across the country under tight security.
Giù le mani dallo zar. In 7 sono stati arrestati a Mosca la sera dell'apertura al tono con la ballerina di origini polacche, Matilda. Gli hanno minacciato di incendiare i cinema che useranno trasmettere il film.
He told lies about Tsar Nicholas and Tsarina Alexandra.
Ha dato pressioni politiche, lanciato bottiglie Molotov e...
Hiya, I'm Kay, and I watched a banned Russian period drama. Now, if you've been following my content for a while, you know that one of my main historical interests is in the Romanov dynasty. When it comes to reading and learning about the Romanov dynasty, by far, the most of the literature you'll find will be about the last Tsar, in particular, Nicholas II. It is so hot in here, and I closed the windows so the sound wouldn't be bad. People have a really big fascination with the last Tsar of Russia, and that fascination works its way into a lot of media. You have the movie Anastasia, you have Rasputin by Boney M, everyone's favorite dance from Just Dance 2. The Rolling Stones have a verse about the Russian Revolution, and that's barely scratching the surface. And among the media portrayals of the last Romanov Tsar, we have the 2017 film Matilda, An Affair to End an Empire. And it's something of an alternative history. In particular, the film focuses on Nicholas II's ascent to the throne and his affair with Matilda Kaczynska. So for a bit of background, Matilda was the prima ballerina of the St. Petersburg Imperial Theater, and most famously a short-term mistress of Tsar Nicholas II. So Nicholas II, as we know, was the oldest surviving son of Tsar Alexander III of Russia. And we know basically from the age of 16 that Nicholas was very much in love with Princess Alice of Hesse. Alice would eventually become Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna. However, Nicholas's parents were not in favor of this match. So Alexander raised a meeting between Nicholas and Matilda, and then they engaged in an ongoing affair that lasted from about 1890 to 1893. And it came to its close around the time that Nicholas had decided that he was going to propose to Alexandra. And then they get married, and they're regarded as one of the most loving couples in history. They absolutely adore each other. I have a whole book of their love letters, and there are so many different examples that we could go through. I'm just gonna read a short one for you here. And as much as I don't care for Alexandra and Nicholas as rulers, I do find some of their letters quite sweet. So there's this one written on a train from Levidia to Libau in 1898 from Nicholas to Alexandra. And it reads, "I cannot thank you enough for your tender, dear, long letter which you left me in the train. I read it after I lost sight of the launch. Did you see me wave my cap out the window? I followed you until you got into the boat, and after that I lost sight of you in the dark. God grant I may meet you there as quickly as possible. How sad I am not to see your beloved face. I cannot tell you. It is true we are so accustomed to constantly being together that now we are separated, I feel lost." These two were absolutely obsessed with each other. They called themselves huzzy and wifey. They had nicknames for each other's... I'm not going to tell you. Boysy and lady. Honestly, not as creative as I thought it was going to be when I found out either. So the fact that this level of passion exists in real life, and we have this other perspective of Matilda and Nicholas together, supposedly being the true loves of each other's lives, it makes for a lot of controversy. And not only that, there's a whole other level of political and religious controversy that goes behind this film as well. But that's something we'll get into later. First, we're going to go over the film. So the film starts with a scene depicting Tsar Nicholas II at his coronation. And we see a woman walk in, and she's quickly chased by an officer. She runs off and locks him in, and just as Nicholas II is about to crown himself the Emperor of Russia, she shouts out for him. Nicholas then collapses, and we see the name of the film, Matilda. So they go back in time 6 years following this scene, and it's something they don't really tell you. You're kind of left to figure it out on your own. This is something I've kind of noticed a lot in a lot of Russian cinema and Russian TV shows that I've seen. They kind of play around with the timelines in a very liberal way. We then cut to the imperial ballerinas posing for photographs, and there are men off to the side commenting on their beauty, and they say that none compare so much to Matilda. We then cut to the ballerinas on stage, and Nicholas is waiting in his box. One of the dancers, a woman named Lignani, is completing a legendary round of 32 fouettes. When she finishes, she goes backstage and sees Matilda, and she embraces her and says, "The air is here." But unbeknownst to Matilda, she's unlaced part of the back of her dress, so that when she dances on stage, her breast is then exposed to the audience. And Nicholas is enthralled from the audience. Matilda's making very heavy eye contact with him, but she is also a professional and continues to dance. That's what my dance teacher always told me to do growing up if there was ever a costume mishap on stage, which, yeah, if you're in a professional company, I could see that. But also, I was 11 in a community dance class. It just seems like a bit much. Nicholas is clearly struck by her, and so is this other gentleman that we see. Immediately, he's rushing to the stage with a bouquet of roses. He wasted nary a second. And remember him, he's gonna be coming back later. We then cut to the Imperial train, and Tsar Alexander III is showing his son a picture of Matilda, and he says he needs a mistress like her.
Твоя немка никогда мне не нравилась. Как ее там?
Ее зовут Алекс.
Obviously, we know that he's talking about Alexandra. They refer to her as Alex throughout the film, but she wouldn't have been called that until she was baptized into Russian Orthodoxy and officially changed her name from Alice to Alex. Now, Nicky says that he plans to marry her because his duty as heir requires it. But as we mentioned before, his parents already didn't approve, so for him to say he's just doing it for duty is interesting. But we do know that it's true that Alexander III was encouraging Nicholas to pursue an affair with Matilda because he thought it would be a way to make his son grow up and officially become a man, and then possibly get him to look for a marriage outside of Alexandra. Alexander jokingly asks Nicky if he's getting ready for his funeral, which blatantly feels like a gun with Chekhov's name on it. I have to say though, I think the actor playing Nicholas does look quite a lot like him, but it's also worth noticing that Nicholas in real life would have been in his 20s. He looks more like a grown-up version of Nicholas. I would definitely be interested in seeing him play Nicholas in a film taking place later in Nicholas's life. I think he would be a good fit for that. The Imperial train then crashes into a horse cart and derails, and several members of the party are trapped inside. Alexander then proceeds to lift and shoulder the entire train car so that his family and everyone can escape. This is something that actually happened in 1888. So Nicholas was significantly younger when it did take place, but Alexander III did lift the train car. Alexander III was renowned for being massive. He had a wild amount of strength. It was said that he could take a fire poker and turn it into a knot. And this incident too, showcasing a great display of Alexander's strength, would do wonders for Romanov propaganda. He can lift up a whole train car on his shoulders. Surely he can hold the entire state of Russia on his shoulders. But once the family escapes and is out of harm's way, we cut to a scene where Nicholas is spying on Matilda through a looking glass. The ballet dancers are watching the officers wear tutus and dance a little bit from Swan Lake, and honestly, they're kind of crushing it. There's also this flaming obstacle course that's been set up, and they're challenging different officers to go through it, and the officer that wins will win a kiss from a ballerina of his choice. We see the gentleman that had the bouquet of roses at the theater earlier, and we know that he clearly wants to win a kiss from Matilda. Nicholas's cousin, Duke Andre, also shows that he has an interest in Matilda. But Nicholas shames Andre for not bringing Matilda a more extravagant gift, because when Nicholas himself takes Matilda inside a tent, he grants her this very splendid necklace, but warns her that their relationship will not be able to go any further than that. But Matilda tells him, no, you're the one that won't be able to forget me. You will never be able to love anyone like me. Which, good for you, babe. Know your worth. And honestly, that necklace wasn't worth it anyways. We go back to the flaming obstacle course, and the gentleman from earlier, Lieutenant Vorontsov, has won, and he is absolutely determined that he's going to kiss Matilda. So he storms in and attacks Nicholas and threatens to kill him. Naturally, threatening a member of the royal family is treason. So the guards grab him, and next thing we know, he's being sent to the gallows, and that gets spliced with Matilda dancing on stage. I'm assuming we're going back to the original performance where Matilda's leotard slipped. It's not very clear. But backstage, Nicholas goes to see her, and Matilda's like, everyone thinks we've slept together and that you're the reason I got my position in the Imperial Ballet. But there's this cute bit where she's describing how to do a fouette, and Nicholas tries to do one, and so she coaches him through how to do it. Nicholas tells her to call him Nicky, and call him Nicky she does.
Nicky. 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 Це Nicky не буде. Nicky. 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 Nicky.
He says he needs to find a wife by the new year because his father has been ill ever since the train accident. Which, yeah, no kidding, he lifted an entire train car. But then Matilda says that madman almost killed you. So I guess the leotard slip on stage actually happened after the accident? Or maybe they just reused some footage? I don't know. I'm just gonna say they reused some footage just for that scene. I don't know. I need to make sense of this in some way. I'm confused. Matilda mentions that she feels like she's seen Vorontsov before, probably because he was racing and pushing people aside left and right to be able to give her the flowers at the show. And Nicholas is like, well, I actually pardoned him. Next thing we know, he's getting taken to a clinic that looks like a mix between an asylum and a spa. But he ends up being kept submerged in a body of water. And the doctor says that he disobeyed the Tsar, and instead of releasing Vorontsov, he decided he wanted to get information instead. He thinks that if Vorontsov has a connection to Matilda, then Matilda is also a threat to the crown. We then get the cutesy montage of Nicholas and Matilda spending time together. They're running in half speed down the palace hallways. They're going hot air balloon riding. At one point, Nicholas is getting ready for an event, and his mother, Maria Fyodorovna, sees them together and says to her, "I hope he got everything he wanted from you."
Я надеюсь, мой сын получил от вас все, что хотел. И теперь мы увидим вас только на сцене.
And Nicholas decides in retaliation that he's going to bring Matilda to a royal event where the Tsar and Tsarina are present. And we expect Alexander to have a little bit more of a angry reaction to this. Nicholas then introduces Matilda to the Tsar, but he introduces her as Duchess Krasinska. Alexander tells Matilda that Nicholas is still a boy. The man in his 40s is still a boy. I feel like it would have been more believable if they actually cast a guy who was 22, but I guess all the actors that are 22 are too busy playing high schoolers on CW, so. But this does tie back to some historical accuracy. Historically, Nicholas was famously unprepared to take the throne. Alexander had kind of kept Nicholas away from ruling. He kept believing that he wasn't really strong enough or old enough to accept responsibility. But then when Alexander died of kidney failure quite young, it left Nicholas in a very daunting position. He spent most of his life quite literally looking up to his father. I mean that in a very literal sense. His father was well over 6 foot. Nicholas was 5'7", at the most, maybe 5'6". And Alexander often teased him for being girlish. We cut to Nicholas being swarmed by courtiers after his father has died. They all have these different demands for him, and now he's the heir, so he's the one responsible for everything. And he's telling his advisor that he feels unprepared to be Tsar, and his advisor tells him, as Tsar, you have the right to everything. Everything but love.
Будет кабинет твоей жены. Все как Алекс любит.
In real time, Nicholas and Alexandra were already engaged by the time of Alexander III's death, and the wedding lined up very closely to the funeral of the Tsar, so much so to the point that when Nicholas and Alexandra did get married, Alexandra said that the only difference between the wedding and the funeral events seemed to be that she was wearing a white dress instead of a black one. But back to the film, we see Alexandra getting off of a train, dressed in the appropriate mourning colors, and Nicholas goes to greet her, and it's obvious right off the bat that she cares for him more than he does for her. Nicholas's mother is also drilling into her son that he needs to get married and have the coronation as soon as possible. She tells him to forget about Matilda and have Matilda return any love letters that Nicholas wrote. Because Nicholas apparently wrote love letters promising that they were going to get married and go off and live a quiet life somewhere. So if anybody finds those, that's not great. But Nicholas refuses, so Maria decides she'll take things into her own hands. Meanwhile, in the ballet studio, it's announced that the Imperial Ballet will travel to Moscow for the coronation and that the heir is going to marry. Matilda suggests that she should play the part of the bride, but it goes to Legnini. Legnini? I always struggle with her name, I'm sorry. And her ballet instructor says you can do it if you can do the 32 fouettes. And her embroidered corset is cute. I liked those. When Matilda goes home, she sees one of the doctors from the lab seated at her dining room table. And he vaguely threatens her and says, if you don't give me the letters, or if you go to the coronation of the wedding, then there's going to be trouble. I've drawn a line for you. Do not cross it. In the morning, Matilda is upset with Nicholas that Alexandra has come to visit. But Nicholas promises her that he's going to find some way that they can be married. We then cut to Nicholas and Alexandra in a seance, and they're trying to channel the spirit of Alexander III to get his blessing for the marriage. And this is actually kind of veering towards accurate once again. Nicholas and Alexandra did actually attend seances together, and Alex in particular was very superstitious. Naturally, most people look at her connection with Rasputin as evidence of this, but Alexandra also sought treatment from other mystics, in particular one named Nizier Anthelme Philippe. He gave Alexander various suggestions on how to have a male heir. And just before he died in 1905, he promised Alexander that there would be somebody like him that would come to replace him and provide Alexander with comfort. Can you guess who? They made a whole dance routine for him. Alexandra then later goes back to the medium, a man named Dr. Fisher, to ask for his advice. And he's happy to offer the advice, but he needs a sample of someone's blood to be able to tell their future. Nicholas tells his cousin Andre that he wants to see if Matilda has any tie to a royal family somewhere else in Europe. So Andre and Matilda look through various records together, and Andre's like, please move to Paris with me. But she basically tells him no, and that if they married, it wouldn't be a true marriage because she's not in love with him. And he tells her, oh, if I were Nicholas, I would give up the throne to be with you.
Без Ники я бы отказался от престола. Жил бы как частное лицо, наслаждаясь любовью самой красивой женщины на свете.
Back to Alex and Dr. Fisher, he takes a blood sample from her, and he shows her this little scrap of footage of Matilda dancing. They use this so much throughout the movie. Where did everyone get access to this clip? He says that if Alex can get a sample of Matilda's blood, then he can see whether or not Matilda will become a problem for Nikki's and Alexandra's marriage. Matilda finds that somebody has absolutely gone through her house and wrecked everything in search of the letters. So she tries to call Nicholas, but when she picks up, it's Alex on the end of the line.
Почему ты молчишь? Мне страшно.
Back to Vorontsov, he's being tortured while shown that same clip of Matilda. And he's saying that he wants Matilda to run away or else he'll kill her. And so the two doctors are like, ooh, this would be a convenient way to get rid of Matilda. Meanwhile, Matilda is practicing her 32 fouettes and things aren't quite going well for her. Vorontsov then manages to break free and he drowns Dr. Fisher. While Matilda is practicing her 32 fouettes, Alex goes and tries to sneak a sample of her blood. Alex also takes a moment to tell Matilda that no matter what, she will never be enough. And while Alex doesn't get the sample of blood that she wants from Matilda, she finds a lot of blood in her point shoe that she decides to steal as a sample. However, when she goes to find Dr. Fisher, she finds that Dr. Fisher has been drowned. Matilda then chases after Nicholas's train as Nicholas is trying to put Alexandra on the train, and he goes to Matilda and promises that this will not be the end for them, that he'll find a way for them to be together. While his fiancée is on the train. The audacity of men. On the train, when people are waving to see the Tsar, he sees Vorontsov in the crowd. But just like the real Tsar Nicholas II, he does what he does best. Nothing. At least not for now.
There's one thing about me is that I'm gonna dilly-dally.
Nicholas's advisor tells him that for the coronation, there's going to be a celebration at Kodinka, which if you know anything about the Kodinka tragedy, this is not going to end well. And while Nicholas is overlooking the scene, he sees that Andre is taking Matilda across a little ferry. And Andre is telling Matilda that they could be happy together if they got married. And Matilda kind of rubs in the fact that she's been with different men. And Andre's like, sometimes I think I could kill you. Ma'am, no.
Мне иногда кажется, что я готов убить вас.
I would jump into the lake and swim away. But she just laughs it off. I had actually felt kind of sorry for him up to this point too, but after this, he can choke. And it turns out Andre was leading Matilda to a house accessible by lake that Nicholas has designed for her. And she meets Nicholas there and he shows her around, and the house also has a small stage set up for her, which honestly, I'm not gonna lie, that's super romantic. She tells Nikki that she wants him to give up the crown so they can be together. And it's at this point I got distracted looking at that weird steampunk corset thing that she has going on. It's around this point that the costuming kind of goes off the rails in general. There's also this bit where Alexandra's like trying on this silvery fabric, and I was like, ooh, don't really like how that looks. But then I was like, am I just being judgmental? Am I being rude? But then Maria Fyodorovna walks by and she's like, you're gonna wear this? Poor taste.
В этом платье собираетесь на коронацию? Дурной вкус.
So I felt vindicated. Matilda runs out back to Andre and kisses him in front of Nicholas and says, give us your blessing. But guess who's also in the house somehow? Vorontsov. But once again, we're not going to worry about that for right now. Nicholas is starting to panic about the impending coronation, and Maria's like, you're only going to get out of this if you die. We also see Nicholas showing this footage on a cinematic projection showcasing the arrival of the Imperial train. And guess who arrives? Andre with Matilda as his guest. And with a single bow on her shoulder, she returns the letters back to Nicholas before storming out. However, when she runs out, she's grabbed by one of Nicholas's agents, and they take her back to the ballet group, where she sees that the part of the bride is in fact being played by Lignani. Lignani? I've watched this movie a couple times now and I still don't know. I'm really surprised that the agent didn't do more to detain her other than being like a, hey, don't do that, but plot. And while Lignani is having a rendezvous with one of the officers backstage, Matilda then locks her in and steals the bride costume. She then tries to steal the stage and do the 32 fouettes, but she falls and then runs away with Nicholas chasing after her. There's also like a couple seconds with the Kaiser Wilhelm cameo. Just had to sneak that in there. Nicholas meets Matilda again on stage after everyone's emptied out, and at this point, I don't know what we're doing here. What are we going for? The back and forth is starting to stress me out, but this time he says they're gonna be together. And she does the 32 fouettes for him, completing all 32 this time. Alexandra, turns out, was watching from the box. She claps for Matilda before turning away. She's better than me. I would have been so done at this point.
32! Поздравляю!
Nicholas is planning his escape in this snazzy leather coat. Andre is again driving them around. I feel like the only reason Andre was in this movie was to drive people around and get cucked. Meanwhile, Matilda is packing out her house to run away, and she hears a knock at the door, but when she goes to answer, it's not Nicholas, it's Vorontsov. And he's like, I gave you flowers at every show and you threw them away. I left my fiancée for you and she killed herself. What? That was never brought up before. Why is that only coming up now? I have so many questions. Why are we just now getting into this? It's a very stressful situation, and he's being really creepy. He's like, we're gonna live in the middle of the forest so no one can find us. And oh, I hate this. But then Nicholas's agents pulled up and they reveal that they've lit dynamite on the ferry. Nicholas and Andre then pull up to the house and the ferry explodes, seemingly killing Matilda and Vorontsov both. But plot twist, Matilda didn't actually die. She was saved by one of Nicholas's agents. And he's like, everyone needs to think that you died. Don't show up during the coronation. It's going to be for the best. How did she survive that explosion? How did she survive that and Vorontsov didn't? Not saying that I wanted him to, but it seems that How? We see Nicholas and Alexandra together and they're looking back on the time when they first met. He was 16, she was 12. He said that everyone called you Sonny, and it's so sad that I nearly lost you. This sentiment would have been so much sweeter if he'd bothered to show her any affection prior to this, and if he hadn't spent the whole movie actively trying to pursue another woman. But they're getting married, and they're doing the same cute run through the palace on half speed like he did with Matilda, and there's a corset without a chemise. Jail time, right to jail. But then we go back to the coronation scene from the beginning, and it's overlapped with scenes of the crowds at Kodinka. And we know how this is gonna go. The contrast between the splendor of the coronation and the starving crowds is very poignant. And I honestly didn't expect the movie to look at things from that angle, because a lot of movies about royalty, they tend to focus so much on just the royal circumstance, and they're just like, we don't need to see what the peasants are doing. It's boring. They wear neutrals. We wear diamonds. We also see Matilda running into the coronation like at the beginning. But at this point, I'm way more invested in the scene that's happening with the crowds at Kodinka. But again, they kind of gloss over that to give us the scene that we've already watched before. Nicholas hears Matilda calling out for him. Then there's a moment that we're assuming is probably from his imagination. We then see him running through the crowd and kissing Matilda one last time. But then it cuts back to Nicholas putting the crown on, accepting the orb and scepter, and officially being crowned Emperor of Russia. He then goes out to the fields of Kodinka and sees all the remains of the stampede. He then says that he wants to pay the families of the dead and buy coffins for everyone. He then ignites his own coronation fireworks, which illuminate the scene below of the tragedy. Then Nicholas and Alexandra are praying together, and it's another corset without a chemise. Life sentence! The ending captions then say that Nicholas and Alexandra were happily married for 24 years before their family was murdered on the 17th of July, 1918. We then find out that Matilda did end up marrying Duke Andre and gained the title of princess, and then she died at the age of 99, and roll credits. I figured it would be fitting to end the discussion of the film with this quote from Matilda's memoirs. Quote, "My feelings on the day of the Emperor's marriage can only be understood by those really capable of loving with all their heart and soul, those who sincerely believe in the existence of true love. Hour by hour, I followed the events of that fatal day. I suffered terribly and tried my hardest to keep the wound which this painful blow had recently opened hidden in the depths of my being. I wanted to regard the woman who was stealing my loved Nicky from me by marrying him as my sovereign and nothing else." Now that we've discussed the film, let's talk about the controversy. Because if you were to say the reception of this film was a dumpster fire, you would almost be right. So one of the main protesters behind the movie was a woman named Natalia Vladimirovna Bolkonskaya. And she claimed that local prosecutors needed to evaluate whether or not the movie was sacrilegious. This is because after Nicholas II and his family were killed, they were eventually canonized into the Russian Orthodox Church. And given that this movie portrays a man who would eventually be canonized as a saint doing less than saintly things like having an affair, it can be quite upsetting. According to the Telegraph UK, cinema managers were contacted and threatened with their cinemas being burned down if they showed the film. In one case, there was reports of a group of 500 people gathering together in Moscow to pray away the evil of the movie. On the 4th of September 2017, a man was arrested after crashing his Jeep into a cinema. There was a radical religious group known as the Christian State Holy Roost, and members of this group were held on suspicion of arson attacks. There was also a lawyer who was representing the director who had charred cars end up outside of his office with notes that said "burn for Matilda." So there are very serious implications and actions behind the movie, but for those who aren't particularly political or religious, the main reception of the movie was just eh. And a lot of the reviews that I've read on IMDb or in the YouTube comments where I watched this movie, people were very quick to say whether or not they were reviewing the movie solely with a political or religious agenda or just for the sake of the movie itself. For those that were watching the movie just on its own merit, they were very quick to be like, I just don't think it's very good. There's even an article from the Moscow Times that reads, the film Matilda isn't really that controversial. Just sit back and enjoy the show. There's only one review on the Rotten Tomatoes page that reads, quote, when compared to other epic love stories set in the 19th century, psychological acuity has been replaced by opulent splendor. Those bloody feet reveal more about a character than a slow-mo fainting scene at the last emperor's coronation. There's also only one audience review with a 1-star rating. The movie still manages to hold a 73% approval rating. So I don't really know how the math works on that one. So in a way, the controversy may have been what drew a lot of audiences outside of Russia. People wanted to know what all the hype was about around the movie, and after seeing it, they were ultimately kind of underwhelmed. This is something I would watch once on a plane and be like, oh yeah, that's interesting. Then I would just check the flight tracker and realize I still have 5 hours until I land in Tacoma. But what do you think? Have you watched Matilda before this? Do you think you'd be interested in watching it now? Let me know. And if you enjoyed this video, bite your thumb up at me, sir, and toss me a subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.